I just want to take a brief moment to ask all of you to give Sarah Stern a standing ovation for the work that she has done for Endowment, for Israel, for the United States, for everybody in this room, to bring truth. She's a godsend, she's an angel, she is a gift from God, and I think that we're all honored to know Sarah, to work with Sarah, and I urge you all to spread the word about Emmett and the work that Sarah does, because we need you all. Sarah cannot do this alone. She needs your support. I'm proud to work with her. I know that everybody in this room is proud to know her and to do the work of God, and thank you all for coming. God bless Sarah.
I couldn't have said it better myself, but I'm going to try. Sarah is a Proverbs 31 woman. If you haven't read that passage recently, I urge you to do it tonight. She's an amazing gift, not only to Israel and the Jewish people, but to America and certainly to my wife and myself. We've had the great privilege of sharing a number of Shabbat dinners with Sarah and her always interesting table of guests. If you've ever had that experience, you know what I'm talking about. She is a woman of character and nobility. She and her husband, Buddy, are just two of our greatest friends. We admire and we respect them. She has character, she has virtue, she is honest. And you know, I was thinking about something Ted Koppel said a few years ago in a commencement speech. He said, "Truth is not a polite tap on the shoulder. Truth is a howling reproach." And what we need in our country right now, indeed in the world, is more howling reproaches, because the evil and the lies are speaking up loudly. And we have to counter that, and Endowment is doing precisely that. It's not a big organization. It doesn't have some of the big money behind it, the press attention like J Street. And what Alan Dershowitz said earlier is so true, and others have said as well. Some of the greatest enemies of Israel are ethnically Jewish, which is, to me, suicidal. And someone asked me once, they wrote me a letter from Florida, a Jewish lady, Miami, reading one of my columns, and I was trying to explain Tom Friedman to her. She says, why do you understand the situation in the Middle East more than Tom Friedman? And I answered, Jewish guilt. So what can I say? We have a rare opportunity tonight, and I'm going to participate in it too. Just so you know, I am not being paid for this, unlike Hillary Clinton would be, okay? That's not a political remark, is it? But I'm being paid in a currency that is greater than money. The friendship of Sarah and Buddy, and the privilege of standing up and speaking on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people whom I love very much and who have contributed so much to our world. Now, during dessert, you had some cards passed out, and I want you to seriously consider tonight not what you can do comfortably, but what you can do uncomfortably, because this is an investment. It's not sacrificial giving. I hate that word, those words. This is an investment, and when you invest, you're expecting to get something in return. And if the future of the Jewish state, which I said at the beginning is inextricably tied to the future of the Jewish people, not only in America but throughout the world, is not important to you, and what the world are you doing here tonight? Why am I here tonight? Anybody know what the national score is? Okay, well, tell me later. Who? What? Oh, good, 6-0 Nationals. I feel good now. Now, I want you to look at these categories here. And it's only money. If you're not giving it here, the government's going to take it. We all know they waste it, right? Okay. Now, here are the categories. And by the way, I know who can give the most here tonight because I checked the IRS before I got here. $50,000, $25,000, $10,000, $5,000, $1,800. How'd that get in there? That's weird. $500, $180, or other, which I hope will be greater than $50,000, but whatever you can do, okay? Please, this is important. It really is. And I'm going to give something, and I'm going to start the giving this evening because I believe in this cause. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to send a check. And unlike most checks that comes from Washington, this one is my own money. Now, if you want to give by credit card tonight, and listen, I got some great news for you. Got some great news for you. Sarah didn't know I was going to say this. If your credit card is tied to one of those airline programs, depending on your level of generosity tonight, you could be on the beach at Waikiki next year, okay? I'm just saying, okay? So if you won't give for the right reason, give for selfish reasons. We don't care. We don't care what your reason is, all right? Thank you. Now you have to write your name, the name that's on your credit card, your address, the credit card number, the expiration date, that's the card, not you, security code, email, phone number, blood type, who you intend to vote for. No, that's not right. And all that good stuff. Now, you may not have brought a checkbook tonight. You may, have one of those electronic banking things. That's fine. But do it before you go to bed tonight so you don't forget. I'd like to see the greatest, what's the greatest amount you've ever raised at this, Sarah? What? What? Really? No, you lie. You're not 100,000. No. What? How much, Sarah? 60,000. That's disgusting. The government spends that in a half a second. 60,000. How many people we got here tonight? 400 people here tonight. And I know that's true because she's not a Baptist, okay? Yeah, they always count the people in the graveyard and everything as members. 400 people. Do you realize how much good could be done, how much truth could be told about Israel, the Middle East, the Jewish people, if everybody here tonight gave a minimum, on average, okay, and I'll start, of $1,000, we'd have $400,000 more than Sarah and Emet has ever raised, and I would be the perpetual host for the next 100 years, okay? Which I know you really want to hear. So think about this, and those of you who pray about this, because God is in this. God is with the Jewish people. He fulfills his promises. He always has. He doesn't lie. And you cannot outgive him. I tried once. Believe me, you can't. Not hard, but enough, all right? So please, if you can do 180 easy, if it's pocket change to you, would you consider 500? If you could do 500 easily, would you consider 1,800? It's only money. If you've got a bad habit, give it up. If you read the New York Times, cancel it. I always say I read two things every day, my Bible and the New York Times, so I know what each side is doing. If you can do 5,000 comfortably, you can do 10 easily. Come on, you know you can, all right? Seriously, this is important. This is why we're here. This is why we love Israel and the Jewish people. This is what matters in this town. So thank you for your generosity in advance. Thank you for your commitment to Emet and to Sarah and the wonderful work she and her staff are doing. Now, when you fill that out, if you want to do this tonight, put it in the envelope. You want to leave it on the table and have people collect it later? Okay, just do that, and we thank you in advance for your generosity. Now, to finish off our program, we have two wonderful people to honor this evening. Congressman Ron DeSantis is in his second term as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Florida. Congressman DeSantis has served on the Judiciary, Foreign Affairs, and my favorite congressional committee, Oversight and Government Reform. Okay, it's not his fault. Congressman DeSantis joined the Judge Advocate General Corps of the U.S. Navy in 2004 before receiving his J.D. from Harvard Law School in 2005 with honors. During his yes, thank you very much. It's his mother over there. During his active duty Navy service, he served as a military prosecutor, supported operations at the terrorist detention center in Guantanamo Bay, which I hope will remain open, and deployed to Iraq during the 2007 troop surge. You remember what the troop surge was? That was when we were winning before we retreated. As an advisor to a U.S. Navy SEAL commander in support of counterinsurgency operations in Iraq. Throughout his congressional career, the congressman has always been a courageous and forthright friend of the State of Israel. He was a sponsor of the Non-Discrimination of Israel and Labeling Act. He introduced the Palestinian Accountability Act. He introduced and was always been a strong opponent of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. At Emet's request, on February 2nd, Congressman DeSantis' National Security Oversight Subcommittee held a groundbreaking hearing called Seeking Justice for American Victims of Palestinian Terrorism. Although the Department of Justice had the necessary tools to obtain justice for over 25 years, and 66 Americans have been killed, plus 2 unborn children, and over 100 Americans injured by Palestinian terrorists. Not a single Palestinian terrorist has ever been prosecuted for these crimes. Thanks to this hearing, the DOJ was forced to defend its record of inaction under oath, and great pressure has been placed on them to prosecute Palestinian terrorists. Last December, Congressman DeSantis introduced legislation to protect American cities from any vulnerabilities within our refugee resettlement program to ensure that terrorists are not among the refugees. Congressman DeSantis was also one of the first members of Congress to speak out against the Iran deal, calling it, quote, an insult to the memories of the people who lost their lives on our behalf. And for that reason, in addition to all the other great ones, we need to reject this deal resoundingly. It's a great honor and privilege to honor Congressman DeSantis tonight. And if you'll come up here, sir, along with Sarah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, guys. Good evening. It's great to be here. What an honor. You know, as I was thinking about what to say today, I actually thought back to the beginning of time, and I don't know if this story is true, but supposedly when God was creating the world, he was very excited about the Jewish people being his chosen people, very excited about the land of Israel. And the angel Gabriel said to him, Lord, aren't you being a little kind to the Jewish people, or a little too much there? And he said, wait till you see the neighbors I give them. And I remember that because I think Israel faces a greater array of threats today than any time since the establishment of the modern state almost 70 years ago. If you think about ISIS, which we're very preoccupied with, that may be 5th on the list of an Israeli prime minister. You have Hezbollah, you have Hamas, and of course, you have the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, the maniacal regime in Iran. And so I think now is a time where we desperately need moral clarity. Now is a time where we have to stand forthrightly and unapologetically behind the state of Israel. And that means being honest about the threats. I'm from Florida. If someone in the Bahamas started firing missiles into Fort Lauderdale, you know how long we would put up with that before we just flattened the people who were doing it? And yet, when Israel has missiles raining down on its civilian population and it moves to defend itself, a lot of the chorus of criticism, even in Washington, the press, Europe, they're blaming Israel for simply defending its civilian population. We have to commit 100% to the idea that Israel has every right to defend itself, and when they're being attacked by terrorists, they need to go and defeat the terrorists who are attacking them. You know, I hear about the Israeli-Arab conflict, the search for peace. You listen to people in Washington or Europe, you think the root cause of this conflict is because Israel has the gall to build some apartment buildings in its own capital. That is not the problem, and we have to be honest with it. The problem is the consistent, unapologetic rejection of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And we see this with Palestinian Arabs who make payments to the families of Palestinian terrorists who kill Jews. The more Jews you kill, the greater the payments to the families. The Palestinian Authority names schools and sports teams after suicide bombers. And the incitement culture is so destructive and so terrible that they're simply perpetuating hatred of the West and Israel with their new generation of Palestinians. And what does Israel do? There's probably no better place in the Middle East to live as an Arab than in the state of Israel. You can serve on the Supreme Court. You can do all these things, start a business. So there is no moral equivalence whatsoever between the two sides in this conflict. And I think that we need to do a better job of showing solidarity with the state of Israel. One of the best ways we can do it next January is to finally move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That would not only be good by Israel, but I think that would send a signal to all of our allies throughout the rest of the world that, you know what, we're done with this confusion of where we drag our allies through the mud and we genuflect to our enemies. We're going to stand by our friends, we're going to be firm with our enemies, and that will absolutely lead to a more peaceful world. Professor Dershowitz talked about BDS. I was one of the first ones to hold a hearing about BDS, and here's the BDS is a total fraud. And this little tidbit, I think, encapsulates it. The afternoon we did the BDS hearing, I had a hearing on foreign affairs about the Iran deal. There were all these left-wing protesters at the Iran hearing protesting in favor of us trading with Iran. They wanted to get rid of the sanctions, do business with Iran. Now, I disagree with that, but if that's your position, fine. Well, the same people show up to my hearing about BDS. Now, they're protesting my hearing in favor of boycotting Israel. So they'll trade with Iran, they'll trade with the Sudan, they will trade with anybody except this little tiny country, the world's only Jewish state. That, my friends, is a fraud. That is anti-Semitism, and we need to call BDS out. There should never be any taxpayer funds expended for any institution or organization that singles out Israel for disfavored treatment. And we need to fight. If people are boycotting and they don't want to do business with Israel, then we won't do business with them. Sarah and Ahmed have been great because the issue, when it was brought to my attention about dozens of Americans murdered by Palestinian terrorists, and yet some of these terrorists walk free, even though we have the tools to prosecute some of these people, there's not been a single solitary prosecution. So we were able to bring this to public view, not only bring in the Justice Department, but allowing the victims, some of the victims' family members, to tell their heart-wrenching stories. And I would never hold my breath when I'm dealing with this administration, but they are on the defensive now, and if we don't see action soon, I think they understand they are going to pay a political price, because the American people want justice for our citizens who were killed by terrorists abroad. And the final thing I'll say as we are embarking, I hope, on an era of moral clarity is you're never going to defeat the enemies of our country and Israel if you can't accurately identify them. These are not people who are engaged in man-caused disasters or workplace violence or even violent extremism. This is a global jihad that is motivated by a very specific and virulent ideology, and it's an ideology rooted in militant Islam, and they believe that it is their duty to wage war against any nation or individual that does not submit to their totalitarian worldview. So I don't care if you're ISIS, I don't care if you're the regime in Tehran, anybody who holds that ideology is an enemy of Western civilization, it's an enemy of the state of Israel, and it's an enemy of the United States. And we need to say that, and we need to say that loudly, and there are certain ways we can do it. One of the ways, I know Louis Gohmert, I'm working on pushing this through. We've actually got it through a committee, but we need to get it to the full House, and it's very simple. It will finally designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. The Brotherhood is not part of the solution in the Middle East. The Brotherhood is a big part of the problem, and we need to be crystal clear about that. The thing is that when you talk about it as a global jihad, people talk about, oh, Iran and ISIS, they don't get along, this is stuff. Look, they both agree there should be a caliphate. They both agree you should have Sharia and a totalitarian society. They both disagree about death to Israel and death to America. They just disagree about who should run the caliphate. But vis-a-vis us, they have basically the same ideology. And so whether you're talking about ISIS or whether you're talking about Iran, the dangers are very, very real and very, very apparent particularly when you're starting to talk about nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. During the Cold War, we had a doctrine of mutually assured destruction with the Soviet Union because Soviet Union knew they could fire a missile and take out an American city, but they also knew that the United States would respond and kill an equal or maybe more number of Soviets. Now, they were communists, so they were atheists, so they didn't have anywhere to go if they got blown off the face of this earth, so that wasn't very appealing to a lot of them. So it served to kind of keep this in check. Well, you look at a country like Iran or a group like ISIS, if Iran could fire a nuclear missile and take out 6 million Israelis in Tel Aviv, even knowing that Israel could respond and potentially take out many more in Tehran, they view that not as a deterrent, but potentially as an inducement to do it. Because in their twisted ideology, they think that everybody in Iran, all the Muslims that were killed, would go directly to paradise, they would hasten the return of the 12th Imam, and they would be doing their duty. And so to engage in policies that reward this regime by giving them $150 billion and allowing them to maintain this vast nuclear infrastructure. Now they say, oh, well, we're going to inspect it when they don't even have access to many of the sites. That is playing with fire, my friends. And I think that where we're going with this Iran deal is now even beyond the concessions that were in the Iran deal. They said they weren't going to have access to the financial system. That's not even in the Iran deal, and yet now the administration is working to give them indirect access to the American dollar. They said that they're putting taxpayer funds to buy heavy water from Iran. That's not even in the deal. That's a gratuitous subsidy that's going directly into the coffers of Iran's nuclear program. So we have to understand who we're dealing with. They are the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And when I was in Iraq, I was in a Sunni Arab area, so there was Al-Qaeda in Iraq and that whole deal. And that was really what was in the press at the time. But the thing is, if you look at the numbers and you looked at the reports coming in, the number one source of death for our service members in Iraq was not Sunni insurgents. It was not Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a Sunni group. It were groups funded and directed by Iran and by the Quds Force and Shia militias. And so they have more American blood on their hands than virtually any other group in the world today. And so they are a threat to the peace and security of the world. They're an existential threat to our ally Israel. And we desperately need new policies that will recognize that threat for what it is and get tough with Iran, because if not, I fear you're going to continue to see them dominate the Middle East. I think they're going to be funding Hamas and Hezbollah until the cows come home. That hurts Israel's security, but it ultimately hurts our security. So let me just thank you all for supporting this organization. Anytime I need ideas about how we can press the case of national security, this is one of the first places that we go. And I know Sarah works extremely hard and her staff to bring the truth to light, and to be honest about the challenges that we face in this world, and to make sure that our policies are reacting to those so that we can keep the American people safe and we can stand by countries that stand by us, such as the State of Israel. So thank you all. God bless you. God bless America.
Of course, as you all know, we are a 501c3, so I can't make political statements, but all of us should know that this wonderful congressman from Florida, Ron DeSantis, is running for Senate in the state of Florida. Thank you.
Sarah, you have beautiful nails tonight. Everybody take a look at Sarah's nails before she leaves. They're very nice. Probably had them done today. All right, our final honoree tonight, we're almost on schedule, which is a miracle in itself. David Milstein is currently a research analyst for Senator Ted Cruz and has proudly worked for the senator for almost 3 years, primarily focusing on issues related to Israel. David has played an important role on a number of the senator's pro-Israel initiatives, such as working to fund Israeli missile defense programs, introducing the PLO Accountability Act to close down the PLO office in Washington. That would be nice. Speaking out against Palestinian terrorism that has targeted both Israeli and American citizens, chairing a hearing on how the executive branch, more often than not, does not stand up for American victims of terrorism, introducing legislation to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and recognize Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital, which ought to be obvious, and much more. Now, prior to joining Senator Cruz's staff, David graduated from Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where, among other things, the Washington, we can't name them now because of political correctness, but they're related to Indians, football team once practiced, where he majored in political science and minored in history. At Dickinson, he served 2 terms as president of the Dickinson College Republicans, wrote political opinion pieces for the school newspaper, and was a leading voice for conservatism, bringing in prominent conservative speakers to campus. David has also played a leadership role with an organization called Young Jewish Conservatives, whose mission is to build a community of politically conservative young Jews who strongly support Israel. David Milstein, come on up, and we are grateful to honor you tonight.
David, you are the hope for our future.
Thank you.
And one of the best things that we do at Endowment is pass the torch of leadership to the next generation, and I am so honored that David will be our first Young Defender of the Truth Award recipient. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Cal, for your kind words, and congratulations to all of tonight's awardees. I am humbled and tremendously proud to be the first person to receive Endowment's Young Defender of the Truth Award, recognizing the next generation committed to supporting a strong U.S.-Israel alliance. Sarah, you and your team are tireless advocates for the truth. Endowment plays an important role on Capitol Hill, educating and informing staffers, members, and other policymakers about the growing threats facing both America and Israel. Thank you, Endowment, for this incredible honor. Before I begin my brief remarks, I would like to quickly take a moment to thank a few people without whom I would not have the privilege of standing before you all today. To my family. It was almost 3 years ago to this very day, June 7, 2013, that the person who I look up to as my hero and father figure, my grandfather, Leo Strauss Jr., passed away. He and my grandmother, Sylvia, who is here tonight, were married for over 61 years. I am truly blessed to have such grandparents. They instilled in me from a very young age, through countless stories and history lessons at the dinner table, a deep love of country, pride in my faith, and a historical appreciation for Israel. I will never forget their recounting of what it felt like to live through the United Nations vote to recognize the Jewish state in November 1947, and then Israel's War of Independence that following May. I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to go to Israel as a teenager when my grandparents took 3 generations of family on a meticulously planned 2-week trip. Only by being there did I fully appreciate and comprehend its special significance. Many of you know that same feeling. When you descend onto the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport, an overwhelming sense of emotion, pride, and awe overtake you, as you realize you are walking in the same place as our forefathers thousands of years ago. To my mom and Jenna, thank you for always supporting, encouraging, and being there for me. And thank you to Mark, the newest member of our family, who passionately speaks the truth on the radio and TV each day. To Paul, Victoria, Nick, and Sam, you are friends and mentors before colleagues who I look up to each day. Finally, I would not be on this stage but for another person, a man of rock-solid core principles and convictions who has also stood at this podium. I'm thankful to work for Senator Ted Cruz. Hey! He cherishes America's relationship with Israel and is always eager to do more to support our closest ally in the Middle East. Thank you, Senator Cruz. Ladies and gentlemen, this award is certainly a special recognition. It is based on many hours of tireless work throughout my 26 years. But it is also just the beginning of a long journey. There is much work to be done because the truth is under assault and worth fighting for. To be a young defender of the truth comes from a sense of duty, to push back against falsehoods and refuse to stay silent. It is to have the courage to speak with moral clarity. When it comes to America and Israel, it means proudly strengthening a relationship that provides enormous benefits for our two nations. It means recognizing that we are both in the same fight against radical Islamic terrorism, whether it is from Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, or ISIS. It means providing Israel the necessary security assistance to defend herself, because this is an investment in our own security as well. It means America must never be neutral when it comes to Israel, but must instead always stand unapologetically with our allies, especially the only true democracy in the Middle East that is a beacon of freedom in a deeply dangerous part of the world. It means condemning the anti-Semitism and double standards spewing forth from the United Nations and other international bodies, and opposing all attempts to whitewash history that deny the ancient connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It means fighting every effort to delegitimize Israel, including the BDS movement, whose real intention, as we all know, is to isolate, weaken, and destroy Israel. And finally, it means speaking out against Palestinian terrorism and the incitement that encourages it, which have led to the slaughter of both Israeli and American citizens. We have already mentioned the heinous attack at the Sarona shopping center in Tel Aviv tonight, in which at least 4 people have been murdered. But I wanted to add one aspect that we have not yet mentioned. The Times of Israel has reported that it occurred in a Max Brenner, a popular restaurant in both Israel and America. According to a witness who works at the restaurant, the 2 gunmen walked inside, ordered a dessert, and then, without touching their food, got up, pulled out their weapons, and started shooting. These terrorists also reportedly came from Hebron. It is worth noting that despite the claims that this conflict is allegedly about occupation, the terrorists decided to travel all the way to Tel Aviv to carry out this attack. Our thoughts and prayers are, of course, with all the victims, their families, and the countless others who have thankfully survived yet experienced this evil act. It is only another continent away where we also again are witnessing the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, where Jews do not feel even safe to walk the streets. And we see a nation led by the deniers of historical truth, where the systematic effort to exterminate the Jewish people is known as a manipulative fairy tale concocted by the West. Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism, where America and Israel are known as the Big and Little Satan, respectively. Ballistic missiles are recently test-fired with the phrase, "Israel must be wiped out," printed in Hebrew, threatening a modern-day Holocaust. It is our obligation to take these threats seriously. As part of the next generation, we must fulfill the promise of our grandparents' generation, the greatest generation, to never forget the horrific atrocities of the past, to ensure that they never occur again. I am honored to receive the Young Defender of the Truth Award because I understand we all bear this leadership responsibility together. It is up to current and future generations to carry that baton. This is what motivates me each day. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise guest. If you can just call your attention, or direct your attention to the screens to a video right now.
I feel safer. I don't think my life is literally under an imminent threat at the moment.
Before he ended up in New York, November 4th was a scary date for John Calvin. It was the date he was to be sent back to the West Bank, a day he said would put his life at risk. Here's how he described it to me last June.
If you are sent back, what will happen to you?
It's a certain death.
Calvin is the grandson of one of the founding members of Hamas. His uncles are in and out of prison for committing acts of terror. At the age of 14, Calvin ran away from home and eventually converted to Christianity. He says he learned his father was planning an honor killing, a claim his father denies. Calvin then made his way to Canada, where he came out as gay. That's where we spoke to him last June.
My life is hanging by a thread.
The Canadian government rejected his application for refugee status, saying that as a teenager, he had been a member of Hamas.
The evidence consisted of him essentially carrying some messages that he hadn't read from one of his uncles to another one of his uncles. There was evidence that someone had given him a handgun, but he certainly wasn't involved in any actual acts of terror.
With the deportation threat looming, Calvin says he fled, fearing his life.
I decided that the best course of action was to flee home and come to the US rather than be deported and sent to my death. I went on a hike and crossed the border, was lost in the mountains for 2 days, where I encountered a border patrol agent and she detained me.
He says he spent a total of nearly 7 months in detention, underwent several trials. According to Calvin, a game changer was our conversation with his father, who told me that the family had the right to retaliate if he was sent back to the West Bank.
My father made an imminent and direct threat to my life. He made it very clear, and that was considered very credible testimony.
What did it feel like when your father told me that your life would be at risk?
Heavy disappointment. I guess I've always wanted a family and I've never had it.
According to Calvin, the judge used the threat as evidence to grant him protection under the UN Convention Against Torture.
He submitted that he does believe that I am barred from asylum, barred from several immigration benefits which I applied for. However, he does believe evidently that I will be under threat of torture and death.
So right now you feel safe and protected in New York City, but you're also kind of in immigration limbo, right?
I am, because my status is one of many complications. I don't have the basic rights of any other person around.